Our next speaker is Professor Vanamala Viswanatha. Professor Viswanatha is a renowned academic and translator working in both English and Kannada. She has taught English language and literature in premier institutions in Bangalore over the last 4 decades, including the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore University, and Azim Premji University. Her deep engagement with Kannada is evident in her work in radio, television, and print journalism, and in her many volumes of translations. Her translation of the Kannada classic, The Life of Harishchandra, in the Murthy Classical Library of India series is considered a landmark publication. Professor Viswanatha.
Thank you for this opportunity. Compared to the speakers of today, I feel very small that I have got this opportunity to speak. I have known Professor Settar personally over the last 4 years. As we stood in silence, the pictures, rolled in front of me. I met him first at a talk he gave in Suchitra 4 years ago, where Mrs. Settar was also there. Largely, he was just talking for an hour or so about his journey, where he started, what he did, and what it meant to him. And I was so struck by the approach he took to his own journey. It was humorous, it was full of information, it gave such a cultural history of his times. And as he moved from place to place, from Dharwad to Mysore, I thought little anecdotes about how he strayed into history while he had planned to do literature. And he was late for a class of Professor C.D. Narasimhaya. And therefore, he just went into Professor Shastri's class in, history. And that's how he kind of accidentally went into this. But he said how literature continued to be, one of his passions. So he regaled us with a whole lot of anecdotes like this. And the kind of, the combination of English and Kannada, the combination of perspectives, it was such an interesting presentation. And the only word that comes to my mind when I think of him is another word for polymath, a Renaissance man, right? The concept of a Renaissance man is one who is multifaceted, who is interested in several, different disciplines, who has several skills, abilities, and who is truly interested in this. And it is an idea of Renaissance humanism, where the man was at the center, human being was at the center of this universe, and the belief was that he or she is capable of, he should use all his abilities, all his potentialities to grow and reach his potential. So in a way, like this is a very apt concept to think of Professor Settar, especially in a world of, where we are moving towards greater specialization. If somebody says they can do so many things, the word that comes to us is, he's a dilettante, master of all, whatever, right? Jack of all, master of none. That's the kind of disbelief we have. But here was a man who knew what he was doing. And another aspect of the Renaissance man is that he or she is able to draw from various disciplines, from various modes of knowledge, to bring all that into fruition in one idea, a project, or concept that one is developing. And yet another side of the Renaissance man is that he wears his scholarship, his abilities lightly, and not make much of it, not wear it on his sleeve as it were, but lightly, so much so that you don't even notice that he or she is doing it, you know. And then, so there's a certain social grace that gets associated with a Renaissance man. So apart from intelligence, apart from abilities, it is all these qualities. And so, to my mind, when I think of Professor Settar, it is this quality that comes to mind. And as Professor Narasimha just described, the kinds of disciplines he straddled, you know, in his the course of his work was just amazing. And but what is the value of being multidisciplinary or being multi, you know? So I would like to say a few things from the point of view of its significance for the cultural politics of Kannada and English and Sanskrit, you know, in this sphere. This is where I come from. And so what did he mean to us, you know, in terms of the linguistic, you know, the language politics of the land? And so the most important, most significant thing, which even Professor Narasimha mentioned, is that he was bilingual. So what? Who isn't bilingual in a country like ours? But, you know, bilingual in the sense of being an active and full and, you know, complete bilingual who was comfortable in different languages, in these two languages. So much so that he could use it not just for, you know, emotional, domestic, or, you know, social needs, but equally for his intellectual work. That is something that is a little rare. And, you know, like Ramchandra Guha, in an article called The Rise and Fall of the Bilingual Intellectual, has talked about this phenomenon of how in the early decades of 20th century, the first half of 20th century, most of our thinkers and writers were bilingual. No? Even Gandhi, you know, starting from there, they were bilingual, and they used different, the light of this language on the other, and set up a dialectic, which is very interesting, you know, and it enriched both languages. So it was that kind of a relationship that the bilingual, you know, had with his readership, with the people he was in touch with. And but this phenomenon of a bilingual intellectual is something that has been, you know, decreasing. And this phenomenon is true even in Karnataka. Even though we have had in the early decades of 20th century people like, you know, like B.M. Shrikantaya, D.L. Narasimhachar, Teenam Shri, all these scholars were well versed in English and Kannada, and they brought the light of Kannada, you know, the kind of analytical frames, the new thinking, the fresh ways of doing research, all these things to bear on building a corpus for the study of Kannada, and brought, you know, ancient literature and made it more accessible for people. Therefore, at that point in history, we had this. And later, even in the next generation, you know, of Dr. Ananthamurthy, Lankesh, all of them were bilingual, but they wrote in Kannada, and they may have taught English, they may have spoken in English, but they did not write in English. Largely, their works were translated into English. And when you come to the next generation, you see that there is quite a schism between, you know, the Kannada and English. You find that bilingualism of an active bilingualism has more or less disappeared. There are those who know Kannada, there are those who write and think in English, and the two seem to be moving apart. And it's in this context that Professor Settar's work, makes an entry, and in the last 20 years or so of his life, his work was, of course, focused on Kannada, but also he wrote in Kannada, on the subject, and showed how Kannada could be deployed for creating knowledge, right? So what he has given us is a blueprint for knowledge creation in our languages. So it is particularly refreshing to see this, because it's not that we have not had a way of knowledge production. As I said, in the earlier decades of the 20th century, there was this kind of an attempt to do that. But after that, there has been some kind of a disconnect, I feel, and now it has kind of come back. Now, in fact, Professor Ananthamurthy has an essay called English Brahmana, Kannada Shudra, anta ondu lekhana ide. Adralli he is talking about how we tend to be in two separate compartments. English for all our intellectual work, for ideas, for thinking, for scholarship, etc., and Kannada for our emotional, personal, social needs. And the two compartments, the chasm between them is almost unbridgeable. So that is why he says our sociology, our research in humanities, it is based on English ideas which we receive in English, and therefore our sociology is, he puts it in very strong language. He says they're like ghosts, in our intellectual universe, without roots, without water. ನೀರು ನೆಲೆ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಅಲಿಯುತ್ತಿರುವ ಭೂತಗಳು ಅನ್ನೋ ಥರದೊಂದು ಇಮೇಜ್ ಅವರು ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. So the point he's making is that if our sociology, if our humanities, if our history writing has to be relevant, complex, and inclusive, you have to know the ground on which, and the people, the issues, the land, the language, the literature. And therefore, in Professor Settar's work, I find the coming together of these two. And as was pointed out earlier, several of his works are in English, especially in the earlier phase, and an equal number of works in Kannada in the latter part of his life. And several of the works in English, he has had them translated into Kannada. So he said in one of his interviews that we need to translate old Kannada texts into new Kannada, modern Kannada, so that they become accessible. Not only that, then we should also translate them into English so that you can go global with this and go international and reach it to people outside. And this was his, notion of, knowledge production. And therefore, I find this model very inclusive, and because he walked the talk, as it were, and showed the possibility and worked it out for us, it's not merely platform talk, but he has given us a template as to how to do it. And also by bringing in new perspectives, like the new historicism and things like that. For instance, in this Halegannada book, which is about Lipi and Lipikara, Lipi Vyavasaya, right? So the focus on the Lipikara, it's almost like a, rereading of social history. That's the subtitle also in the text. So he's looking at what is happening to the artisans. How did they live? What did they do? That history as well. Therefore, he's been able to combine light from different corners of the world and enrich his study of a particular phenomenon. So that's why his work is, very important for us. Yet another aspect of his thought, which is again, especially when, when he was asked this question, under the onslaught of English, do you think Kannada is dying out, or is there a threat from English? He said, no. There is no threat from English. Kannada has had the wisdom of negotiating with, languages like Sanskrit, Persian, Prakrit, Tamil, and everything. Therefore, it will also deal with English, and it will deal with English and grow, right? Therefore, he argued for a more accommodative kind of a perspective. He argued for that Kannada should be more hospitable, and open itself out to these. So the notion of development that he had was very firmly secured in his confidence in Kannada, which again today, when there is an atmosphere of being oppressed by English, a view like this, which comes which comes from lived experience, knowledge, study, and based on evidence, this perspective becomes very, very important for us. And therefore, I feel Professor Settar's work speaks to our politics today in very, very complex, inclusive, and interesting ways. And his openness to diversity is yet another aspect that is very, very striking. And for all these reasons, it's really, yes, it is even I feel personally, bereft. In fact, I was hoping someday I would be able to sit with him and translate Pampa, learn more about Pampa from him and translate him into English. So there are several of these kinds of little dreams I had, which won't happen now. But he has left behind a substantial body of his work, which should be guidance enough for scholars like younger scholars. And for all this, we are very grateful for his ಒಂದು ಯುಗದ ವಿವೇಕ ಇದೆ ಅವರಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ, for the discrimination that we need for our current times. I see that in his work, and therefore that is really worthy of celebration. And the last time I met him, he took me to his house, and Mrs. Settar, played the hostess so gracefully. Like he was saying how he was describing his routine, and he was so content, he said, to just come to his workplace, sit down and do his work quietly. I don't feel like going anywhere. There was such a sense of fulfillment, a sense of satisfaction. So all of that is really something, very worthy of emulation. And then, therefore, he is very disarmingly admitted to his contentment. And this is worthy of celebration. And behind, alongside celebrating Professor Settar, I also want to celebrate Mrs. Settar especially, and the family. Without, without that kind of support from the family, I think, scholars cannot achieve as much as, Professor Settar has. And usually these are the unsung heroes, which are, who are not particularly acknowledged, but I find it a privilege to do that. So I join all of you in celebrating Professor Settar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Viswanatha. We have heard two extraordinary intellectual, scholarly analysis, description of Professor Settar's contribution and work.